All right. uh, you've done debates all around the world. Have you ever had a clever or interesting argument from the other side?
No.
Deconverted Man here, and today I'm going to be looking at a video from Inspiring Philosophy, analyzing it for logical fallacies. In addition, I'm going to be asking the YouTuber who made this video some critical questions that I hope that he answers. Equivocation. The word evidence can be used multiple ways and quite often is used multiple ways by apologetics. Because I've watched this entire video, I already know that this particular apologetic is going to be using evidence in multiple different ways. As such, this is equivocation.
Insist that God's existence must be empirical or scientifically proven. Otherwise, there is no reason to believe a designer exists. The assumption here is that the only reason we should believe something is true is if there is scientific proof for it. But this line of reasoning is not how we operate in several subjects.
The critical question I have at this juncture would be, which subjects are you referring to? Would you provide us a list of the different subjects that we don't apply this reasoning to?
See, science works through inductive methods. We do an experiment 100 times, and if we get the exact same result every time, we conclude that it is scientifically proven.
This is a construct straw man of what science really is. For one, there is no magical number that we need to get to before something is scientifically proven. Secondly, scientifically proven isn't really a thing in science. There's theories and hypotheses, but nothing is really proven, quote unquote. That's something that you would do in mathematics or logic. You would have a proof. But in science, you don't speak that way. So this isn't really science that he's talking about here. Keep that in mind as we continue to listen to his video.
We cannot use the same method to reach a conclusion. Dr. John Lennox explains by looking at forensics.
Erroneous appeal to authority. Now, appeal to authority can be used in an argumentation if the authority that you're citing is an authority on the subject that you're speaking about. In this case, we're speaking about philosophy. We're not speaking about mathematics. And as such, John Lennox, who's a mathematician, might have things to say about philosophy, but is himself not a philosopher. So whatever he does say about philosophy is suspect. Now, this particular quote is actually about science, which is something that John Lennox should know something about, being that mathematics is a field of science. But John Lennox doesn't appear to know anything about science, as he creates a red herring instead of a logically coherent argument.
Across a crime scene and find a person dead, we cannot say, well, I don't know, let's run the experiment again and see what happened.
And off we go into the tangent of the red herring that John Lennox has used here. Actually, yes, you could reconstruct the crime scene with computer simulations or with mannequins or even with live actors and using blanks. And quite often, forensics does do these sort of reconstructions. But this is all based on the straw man of what science is from before.
That would be absurd in figuring out who the murderer is. Instead, we have to deduce a conclusion from the evidence left at the scene. We have to evaluate what has been left behind and reach a logical inference. Another attempt to dodge theistic arguments is to argue that future scientists will find natural explanations for the evidence we use to infer a designer. So essentially, they're relying on induction.
It's perfectly okay for the theist to use evidence to extrapolate an idea, but not for those pesky naturalist non-theist types. They're not allowed to use evidence to make any sort of inference. Only the theist can do this. Yeah, special pleading.
We have to apply the methodology that is appropriate to the claim.
Ah, so I see. So if the claim is made in the field of philosophy, then the methodology used has to be that of philosophy. Even though philosophy doesn't have any methodology, we would have to use methodology from philosophy since it's a philosophical claim, meaning that I can make any philosophical claim that I want, and since you have to use methodology from philosophy, you have to believe my claim since there's no methodology to use from philosophy, right?
Look at subjects like history, forensics, or philosophy. We cannot run experiments or take scientific measurements to determine a conclusion.
One of these things is not like the others. One of these things just doesn't belong. Can you guess which one? It's the one that isn't a straw man. He has two straw men and one that actually is correct. The one that's actually correct is philosophy. As I said before, philosophy has no methodology, and you can't apply scientific principles to it. But you can apply logic to it, which is what I'm doing now. Anyways, so yeah, two more straw men. Let's move on.
Instead, we have to evaluate evidence and deduce an inference, which is why the question, does God exist, is not a scientific one.
This is a half-truth as well as more special pleading. The half-truth is that yes, it's not a scientific question, but no, not for the reasons he says. And the special pleading is, again, that we can use this data, whatever this data is, to infer this thing, but you're not allowed to use the same data to infer a naturalistic explanation instead.
Run an experiment to determine if he exists, any more than we can run an experiment to determine who committed a murder, or where did the first humans originate, or if two people are in love.
Hi, how's it going? Did you miss me? Huh? Did you miss me? No, I didn't miss you, and only people that have been watching my videos will understand why you're talking to me outright lie. Everyone else will be like, deconverted man, he's lost his mind. What's going on? Why is he talking in a high-pitched voice now? So, just to clarify why this is an outright lie, he lists three things after God that we supposedly can't test, but all three things can be tested and are testable, so it's just not true, and therefore it's an outright lie.
Start looking for answers to specific things that are, by definition, outside the natural world. We obviously cannot do a scientific experiment.
So my critical question at this point would be, are we now allowed to just define things into existence? Am I allowed to define something into existence and say that it exists by definition? I'm just wondering if that's something we can do now.
Saying show me the empirical proof in spacetime for something that exists outside of spacetime. It is simply nonsense.
Reification fallacy. This is when people treat an abstract belief or hypothetical construct as if it represented a concrete event or physical entity. Here we have the hypothetical construct that there is something outside of the universe being treated as if that's already true, and thus asking questions about it from science is silly because it's already true and we know that it's true from this philosophical argument, so duh, you can't ask questions about it from science. But you can't just treat the hypothetical construct as if it already exists. If in reality there is nothing outside of space and time, then everything you say about it is wrong.
Arguments take the evidence we can evaluate and reach the most rational inference to explain things where science cannot go.
This has to be an argument of ignorance at this point. The beginning of the universe is not really a thing according to some scientists, and according to others it could be a thing. There's many theories that cover both possibilities, but that definitely is something that's scientifically investigatable to some extent. The so-called fine-tuning of the universe has many problems with it, one being that we have no computer simulations to show us all the other tunings possible of the universe, so we don't know if our universe is finely tuned or if other universes would be life permitting, etc. So it's not really a thing, and it has yet to be demonstrated to be a thing, so it's not really in the scientific field as yet. Moral realism would land in the area of psychology or human behavior studies, which is something that science can address. The universe acts like a quantum computer. I have no idea where you're getting that idea from, but if it's a real thing, then science can address it. Consciousness is something that science has addressed and is learning more about. So that is a field that science can and does address. these are things that I suppose the video maker sees as mysterious, and I suppose I need to add confusing the unexplained with the unexplainable as another logical fallacy being performed here. These things, by and large, aren't that mysterious, and even if they were mysterious, it doesn't mean that they are unexplainable or only explainable by philosophy and will never be explainable by science, although someone could say, well, today they are not explainable by science. Can't we use philosophy to get to the answer? That's an interesting question to raise. My answer would be no, we can't use philosophy to get to any answer at all because philosophy doesn't provide answers. It's good at asking questions, but very bad at producing answers. If you apply the system of logic to philosophy, then you can at least get logically coherent ideas, but you don't have a necessarily true conclusion. Logic can only tell you if something is logical or not logical. Logic is limited in a sense because it doesn't tell you if something is real or not real. Only the field of science can do that. And here we have the philosophical assumption being made that there is this reality that science cannot address and perhaps will never be able to address. And that's really what this whole argument is based on, is this philosophical assumption that there's more to reality than what we can measure and what we can see. And the only justification for that is the philosophical argument. As such, I'm going to have to add circular reasoning as well to the list of logical fallacies here.
And we should keep studying science to form a better view about the natural world. Only an irrational person would suggest otherwise.
This is the nugget of gold within this argument. Something that I can agree with, something that we could all agree with. Although I wouldn't have said that it's something that only an irrational person wouldn't agree with as a addition to the statement. I would have left the statement as is. We should continue doing science because it produces results and lets us know more about the world and universe we live in, and I would have left it at that. The reason I would have done that is because I don't want to appeal to emotion. So this wonderful statement that I agree with is ruined by the logical fallacy of appealing to emotion. Sigh.
An entire worldview only containing science without philosophy will only give you half the picture.
This is a false conundrum. You really don't have this awful decision of having to have your cake or eat it too. When you do science, you don't need philosophy other than the philosophy of science itself, which is already in there. You don't even have to think about it. It's part of the system. So you don't need to add these philosophical arguments into science, and in fact, doing so would not be science anymore, as the video maker himself has already said these philosophical arguments are not science. So how can you possibly have the two side by side? You can't.
The atheist philosopher Thomas Nagel, in his book Mind and Cosmos, argues a materialist worldview will always lack explanatory power for fundamental things we believe exist. Now, even if he is wrong about some of his predictions, his basic point still holds true.
So, again, appeal to authority, cherry picking, and finally, a non sequitur does not follow, because if this gentleman's points are invalid, then we must be skeptical of his conclusions, whatever they are, because that's how logic functions. So you can't say, hey, even if his arguments are wrong, his point still holds. No, it doesn't, because that's not how logic works.
Regardless of how many natural explanations we find, we'll never be able to naturally explain why there are natural explanations in the first place.
critical question, wouldn't the supernatural also never be able to explain the supernatural, so that any posit you have of the supernatural as an explanation for the natural would also be not able to ever explain itself, thus never being an explanation, since itself would never be explainable by itself?
Nagel says, systematic features of the natural world are not coincidences, and I do not believe that we should regard them as brute facts not requiring explanation. Regularities, patterns, and functional organization call out for explanation, more so the more frequent they are. The logical mind seeks the most rational inference to explain the natural order, which is all these philosophical arguments are doing.
This is a straw man. This is not what the logical mind does, nor is it what the logical mind should do. If we are seeking answers to questions, and we're looking at science for the answers as we should, then we are going to find that often those answers don't make intuitive, cognitive, or sometimes even logical sense. One example would be quantum physics. Often you must do the math and not try to understand quantum physics, because understanding it is, for some brains, impossible. Just do the math and know that the math will work without trying to understand the underlying principles of it, because it doesn't make cognitive sense to us. Another example would be the universe might equal out to zero energy. And if that's the case, it might mean that the universe came from nothing. And in fact, nothing might actually weigh something. And in fact, nothing is a thing that we have discovered actually exists. All of these ideas are things that don't make sense. 0 plus 0 equals 0. That's intuitive. That's logical. But it might be, in reality, that 0 plus 0, in this case, equaled 1. That doesn't make sense, but it might be true. If the data says that it's true, then we have to go with the data. Even if the answer doesn't align with logic or intuitive thinking or reasoning, it doesn't matter. What we feel about it, what we think about it, what we want it to be, is irrelevant to whatever it actually is.
Phenomena that people used to attribute to God or gods. So the current evidence for God's existence will later in the future be explained by natural forces, and we do not need to invoke design. But the problem is this reasoning relies on the problem of induction. Claiming because we have found several natural explanations in the past doesn't deductively follow we can conclude there are natural explanations for these other things.
Creation of energy, fine-tuning of matter, and consciousness. All three of those things are studied or could be studied by science. And even if they couldn't be, this is nothing more than an appeal to ignorance, personal incredulity, and confusing the unexplained with the unexplainable. You have 3 logical fallacies, and since you gave us 3 examples, you have 3 logical fallacies 3 times.
Imagine we concluded the detective solved the crime because he has solved 100 prior cases. If atheists really want to refute theism, they have to either show that God is logically impossible or offer a better inference than that of a personal designer.
I know it's a false dichotomy, but I'll take a swing at that first one there. There's no ontological definition for the word God. Every God concept comes from religion, and as such, every God concept is at its core circular. Reasons and explanations of how the religions know about God, if critically analyzed, boiled down to a circular argument of some sort. You can't get away from explaining how you know about God without referencing revelation of God or simply being right about God. They don't offer any non-circular arguments that I have seen thus far to show what God actually is or what God the word means. As such, God is logically impossible because it's based upon a logical fallacy. If you can offer a ontological definition of God that separates itself from every religion, yet is something that every religion can agree upon, then you'll dismantle my argumentation here. If you cannot or will not, then my argument stands.
However, none of the atheist rebuttals to theistic arguments do this. Their main attempt is to try to discredit the possibility that a designer can be the explanation. What's wrong with theism?
We have two more logical fallacies and then my conclusion here, which is the logical fallacy of outright lie and the non sequitur. And the outright lie is him saying earlier in this video that saying I don't know means you can't say you know what the answer isn't. But this is just simply not true. You can have information that gives you what the answer is not. Let's just say the answer is not X, but I don't know what the answer is. It could be any other letter A through Z, but I know that it's not X for sure. I just don't know what the actual answer is. I've eliminated one out of all the different possibilities. So it's patently false. Then the non sequitur occurs when he tries to attack the idea that extraordinary claims requires extraordinary evidence, making the same error that I've already covered in another video, and actually making a potentially logical argument in that it could be seen as subjective, but that argument died out and he didn't follow it and he didn't formulate it correctly, so his conclusion just doesn't follow from the rest of what he presented. Unless or until he can present a logically coherent argument free from logical fallacies, we must continue to be skeptical of his conclusion. And now for a little fun, here's a blooper. One of these things is not like the other. One of these things just doesn't belong. The thing that doesn't belong is philosophy. The other two, well, actually, no, wait, no,